And on Friday, we'll be digging a lot deeper into where this race is headed and what it's going to mean for the future of Massachusetts. That's Friday at 7 here on GBH2. Next up, Chris Cuomo is off the air until further notice at CNN, suspended indefinitely after documents released this week unveiled just how far he went to help his brother, former New York Governor Andrew Cuomo, in the fallout of the sexual assault accusations against him. Among the revelations, Chris Cuomo's text exchanges with the former governor's top aide, asking to help craft a statement to the press, and his admission that he used his media contacts to get ahead of potential new accusations against his brother, telling attorneys he would reach out to sources, other journalists, to see if they had heard of anybody else coming out. At least 16 women have accused Andrew Cuomo of harassment and or assault, a fact his younger brother did not address on air once, up until his brother announced his resignation and Chris Cuomo cited a conflict of interest. But that conflict was on full display and even highlighted in the early days of the pandemic, when the then governor appeared on his brother's show almost nightly with exchanges like this one.
I've always been a soft guy. I am the love gov. I'm a cool dude in a loose mood. You know that. I just say, let it go. Just go with the flow, baby. You know, you can't control anything.
You've never
so
said
don't
any
even
of those
try.
things.
Water off a duck's back.
It's the first time you've said
me.
any of those.
Yeah, I think I. Really? Yeah. Wow.
Never said any of them.
Look, I've
known you my whole life.
All right. Well, that's your opinion.
So, while CNN is saying the new documents reveal a greater level of involvement with his brother's latest scandal than they previously knew about, how much responsibility do they bear nonetheless? I'm joined by Lylah Alphonse, editor with the Boston Globe's Rhode Island Bureau, and media strategist Susie Banikarim. Good to see you both. Susie, let me start with you. When I heard what had been revealed about Chris Cuomo's behavior here, I found myself wondering why he has not been fired. Is that too harsh? Because it seems to me like what he did was unconscionable.
Well, I mean, I agree. I think it was unconscionable. I think the question here is maybe they are working out a potential firing. I mean, these, as you know, television contracts are complicated. Often people are suspended as a precursor to a firing. So I think it's still possible that he might be fired. But I think CNN has really backed themselves into a corner here, right? They used to have a rule that he couldn't cover his brother. They let him have these sort of ridiculous, interviews with him, which we just saw, where he's a cool dude in a loose mood. I mean, that just really rings badly now in retrospect. And then they didn't suspend him when the initial information came out, right? Like, I think if they had suspended him when that information came out, they maybe could have gotten through this piece. But now it just feels like they keep backing themselves into a corner and they have to do something. Otherwise, they lose total credibility here.
Let's talk about that initial information. He made what rereading it today, was basically struck as, it was a non-apology, right? Back in the spring, he said, I'm sorry that I advised my brother when he was going through this stuff, and I know I put CNN in a bad spot, but I'm not really sorry because family comes first and I would do it again. That was the gist. I'm paraphrasing, but I think that's a fairly accurate paraphrase. Lylah, why didn't they suspend him or take some kind of action then? Why did they let him get away with that non-apology apology?
I think that's a great question. I do wonder whether they were hoping that that would be the end of it and they wouldn't have to go into suspension, which, as you can see, generates a lot of media attention, puts CNN in a really bad light. So him apologizing, maybe they hoped that would be it. I have to wonder whether suspended indefinitely pending an investigation means drawing a paycheck because we can't get him out of the contract. But that also makes me wonder if this isn't a terminable offense, what does constitute firing for cause in this case? You've broken all sorts of ethical rules. Yes, it's okay to ask your fellow journalists what they're writing about. No, it's not okay to turn around and tell a source this is what's coming. So I really don't know where CNN set the bar here, but that was a non-apology along the lines of, I'm sorry you're offended, instead of apologizing for one's own behavior.
Lylah, you hinted at something I want to do really quickly here, and that's back up a little bit to try to make as clear as we can the principle that the three of us, or the principles that we think were violated here. Chris Cuomo said in a deposition that he did not make any attempt to influence coverage at CNN or other networks. He said, if I had tried to influence any of the reporting at CNN or anywhere else, I guarantee you people would know, and so would a lot of others. So the idea of one reporter calling another to find out about what's coming down the pipe is completely business as usual. Susie, what would you say the cardinal rule or rules are that Chris Cuomo violated?
Well, I mean, it's just silly to say this is business as usual. It's totally fine to call another journalist to find out if a story is coming down the pike, but not about someone in your own family, right? I mean, there's just a very clear conflict here. And as journalists, there are going to be times when you have a conflict, but you make sure that you step out of your role. So it's fine if Chris Cuomo wants to be family first, but if he's going to advise his brother, then he needs to take a leave during that period. He should not be employed as a journalist at CNN. I mean, I think part of the problem here, though, is that, CNN's main competitor, Fox, holds its anchors to a totally different standard, right? I mean, I'm sure Sean Hannity was advising the president, Trump at the time, on a number of matters like this. So it gets really blurry, but CNN says it holds itself to a different standard than Fox. So you can't have it both ways. They can't say we are a journalistic operation unlike Fox and then give this guy a pass. It's just not going to work.
Lylah, you got us into the question of what principles were violated. Would you add anything to what you've already said and what Susie just said?
I would. I think your average viewer doesn't really understand the difference between getting involved in a story and making a couple calls. When he says he didn't get involved in a story, he means he didn't try to kill a story. He means he didn't try to stop another journalist from reporting on a story. He doesn't mean that he didn't make calls and ask them what they were doing. I think the rule that I have to agree, if he's going to be involved, family first, that's really great. But then you recuse yourself the same way a lawyer would recuse himself from a case. You take a leave of absence from your job as a journalist and don't pretend to be impartial about anything during that time. You certainly, it's certainly more complicated given how he had his brother on as a guest. And I mean, I thought the witty banter between brothers was really charming at first. It was something new and fresh and different, but it did beg the question, what else was going on? How else was he helping? It wasn't just the governor going on his brother's TV show to talk about the pandemic. Now it's going both ways with the journalist helping to craft the media response or the response that the governor would give to the media. And I think that crossed several lines.
It's aged about as poorly as you could imagine it aging. And I think, if I remember correctly, there's one line that's stuck in my brain ever since I watched those exchanges. And that's, if I recall correctly, Chris Cuomo saying to his brother, "Are you single and ready to mingle?" So again, that also doesn't hold up too well. Susie, moving forward for CNN as an institution, as you mentioned, they want to be held to a different standard than Fox. They want to be thought of as a more legitimate news organization than Fox News. What's this going to do to their institutional credibility?
I mean, look, I think that their institutional credibility with the people who believe that CNN is fair and impartial is not going to be that hard hit by this. I think this is such like a unique case and such an unusual circumstance. But there's already a bunch of people who think CNN is fake news, and they're going to just use this to continue to make hay out of that. So I think where we are in sort of the media landscape is people who sort of think you have credibility will continue to support you, and people who don't. It's a bit of a wild west, unfortunately, where we are. But I do think there's, the problem here is that it's not just a story about media, it's also a story about privilege, right? I think when you think about the way Chris Cuomo behaved here, it's that he felt like he was untouchable, that his role at CNN was protected and that he could help his brother continue to contain power and that would be okay. And so there's kind of a larger question of who we hold accountable for things and who gets a pass. And I think they have to show that they treat people fairly. It's more of an issue of how their staff is going to react if they don't do that.
You talk about where we're at when it comes to choosing your fighter in the media landscape. And I think you're right. I think a lot of people do that. One thing that worries me is that there may be people out there who think that, for example, the three of us have engaged in behavior anyway, in any way remotely comparable to what is being discussed here. And I'm pretty sure we haven't, and our colleagues haven't either. This is not a standard MO for those of us who are in the media, and I hope that most people are aware of that. Lylah, is there anything that CNN could do from this point on, moving forward, to, if not put the toothpaste back in the tube, make the situation a little less ugly than it is, and maybe make people who have been critical of CNN think that they're taking this seriously, albeit belatedly, and taking steps to make sure nothing like this happens again?
I think that that's a tough call. actually. I really don't think this hurts their credibility with their fans, and it certainly doesn't help their credibility with the people who are against them. This is exactly the kind of thing people complain about when they complain about the mainstream media, and they lump everyone together into that, even though it's not a monolith. So aside from pedaling back to the beginning of the pandemic and not having the two brothers on, I'm not sure what you can do. This is what happened here is an abuse of power. You have power as a journalist, you have a platform. And the people who are most critical of that already think it's being abused. So I'm not sure how they come back from this other than to wait and see whether people are willing to ignore it and see whoever else they put in that super popular time slot.
Susie, do you agree with Lylah's assessment there, or do you think that there is something that CNN could do when it comes to damage control and credibility enhancement or maintenance?
I mean, on this, I think, there's going to be a real question about whether or not they bring him back and in what capacity, right? They could also, there's an option of bringing him back, but not as the host of this 9 p.m. slot anymore. And it's an extremely popular slot. And I think he's the highest rated show on the network, right? So they're going to have to make a real sacrifice here if they want to sort of convince people that they've taken this seriously. Whether or not they're willing to make that sacrifice, I don't know. I mean, that's like a really tough decision that Jeff Zucker is going to make. He hasn't shown himself willing to make that sacrifice up until now. But he may feel that at this point, Chris has kind of crossed a line. I mean, he did really put them in a bad position because he knew these transcripts existed. And it really does seem like they didn't, right? So he had to have, at some point, you go to someone who works for you and you say, is there anything else coming? Are there any surprises? And it sounds like he didn't prepare them for this.
You're
so
right.
They may be really angry with him. There may be a point at which they feel like he's crossed over into really unethical behavior, whereas before they kind of could defend his position.
On that note, we got, Lylah, yeah, you get the last word here.
I kind of think that they're hoping that if he's suspended for a while and his brother's no longer governor, he can come back at some point, not talk about it, maybe apologize on air and move forward that way. But I just have to wait and see what happens.
Well, and actually, I said, Lylah, you were going to get the last word. I think I'm going to give it to Susie instead because, Susie, you mentioned, I had not seen this yet, but he did offer a sort of a new non-apology apology, right?
Yeah, today he has a serious podcast or radio show, and he came on and said it really hurt to even talk about having been suspended, but he understands why people, feel like he may have done something wrong, but again, didn't admit he'd done anything wrong. And I think the other thing that's really shocking is he's never once acknowledged the women, right? He's like, talks about how much it hurts him to be in this position, but what about these women who he was really sort of doing recon on? I mean, he might not have been doing technical research, but he was saying things like, I have a lead on one of these women. So it's as if like there's just no acknowledgement that there's other people who are being hurt by this. It's not just him that he should be focused on. It's really narcissistic, honestly.
All right, Susie Banikarim, Lylah Alphonse, really good to talk to both of you about this.
Thanks.